I was intending to make a video on the new Paladin from the One D&D UA playtest, but as I was reading through the document and after making the Druid video, it just occurred to me that that's not really the video I want to make. Instead, I want to talk a bit about why this document in particular, but all of the playtest really, has me quite concerned for One D&D. And I'll base my critique in this document, but it's something that I've spoken about before in other of the playtest documents where I've seen some issues. But there are issues in this document in particular that I'm really not stoked about. So first off, we had the Druid, which I covered in the last video on this channel. It's a very long video. You don't have to watch that. The point of that video was, or the thing that made it so long, was my issues with the way they handle wild shape. Because everyone knows that wild shape needed to be fixed in some way. It was something that was holding people back from actually playing Druids, because it's so difficult to go through all of the monster manual and everything to find the right stat blocks and compare stat blocks. And for new players, this was a very daunting task. And then, of course, we had the Moon Druid issue, where at certain levels in the game, especially in the start, and at level 20, the Moon Druid was simply broken beyond belief. It was much better than other characters, martial characters in specific. I basically think there were two ways to go about fixing this. Either you had to fix the animal and the beast stat blocks, and you had to do that in a more clever way, maybe reduce the amount of stat blocks that you had to choose from and make sure that they were properly balanced against each other, and make sure that there were a few viable options at each level the characters would be able to grab stat blocks from. That's one way to do it. The other way was to have a generic stat block and then build from there, and that's the route that Wizards went, but they didn't complete the thought. They just made three very basic stat blocks that were very underpowered and were very unexciting. Now, my issue isn't that the playtest document isn't perfectly balanced or fully developed. My issue is that this feels like a first draft. This feels like an idea. This feels like three stat blocks you could have put together, I could have put together in an afternoon. And that's a good first step. That's something you take to the rest of the design team and say, yeah, I have these stat blocks. I think maybe we can do something with this. And the rest of the team can say, yeah, I think that's a good idea, but maybe we should improve its AC or give it some survivability or make it feel a little bit more fun. Could we do something to make it more dynamic? It shouldn't be the stuff that you're releasing, I think, to the general public as a playtest, because it's been 2 months or more since the last playtest document, and we're going to have a month to digest this and the feedback, and then another month before we get the next document, as far as I can tell the release schedule is. And it's such a slow process for something that is, in my opinion, first draft material. And then I hear some people say, okay, well, they just want our opinion on whether or not it's a good idea to do generic stat blocks. And then if we say it's a good idea, well, then they will continue developing it. Why not give us something that is just halfway developed? Something that shows a proof of concept. This isn't it. This just isn't it. It's a first draft, it's a first step, and we can give a lot of feedback. I expect that most people are going to say, I like the direction, this is very boring and bland, and here's how you can improve it. And then Wizards can go back to the drawing board, take all that input in, and try to publish them new. But that's just whole another half year before we see the next iteration of the Druid based on our feedback. And that leaves me to either believe that they don't know how to design the Druid so it's fun, because this isn't fun. It's an improvement in terms of balance, because the Druid was overpowered, at least at some levels, but it's not fun. There's nothing fun about these stat blocks. You're going to have worse AC, you're going to have slightly better move speed, you're going to have slightly better martial actions, but not really when you're compared to Shillalak. And you lose everything else, even racial traits. It's just a bad experience, and it's not a fun thing. And I think there's so many ways they could have improved it, like invocation style features you can apply to stat blocks. Just 3-5 stat blocks per beast of the land, beast of the whatever, where you had some different options. Are you going to be a snake or a tiger? We can fit those into some boxes. There are so many options for how you could do this, and they didn't explore any of them. So what can we give feedback on? So either they don't know how to create this for some reason, or they don't have the time to create this. It's some budgetary constraints. Maybe there's just one guy sitting in a dark room being asked to redesign 5e. I have no idea about the circumstances, but it's not done right. The other option is, of course, that they purposefully just release this because they want us to come with our feedback, and then they can use that feedback to create it. But then we're basically creating the rules for them, which I think is fine for a small mom and pop operation, a small D&D creator or RPG creator like ourselves, where we're two to 5 people, a really small team sitting and designing stuff, and you can go out and ask opinions. You need some help playtesting because you are that small team. But this is Wizards of the Coast. We have to hold them, I think, or I believe, to a higher standard. If they want to be the Dungeons & Dragons publisher, which is what they are really based on, they need to show that. They need to have put thought into, need to have this document ready to go. They need to have something that we can actually playtest. And the other thing about the Druid is the new channel nature thing, where they get these healing blossoms, and that's just, well, flower-inspired healing in an AoE. Why does the Druid need this? This has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the flavor of Druid. The only thing that makes this Druid flavored is that we're calling it blossoms and we're saying that it's flowers. That's it. Otherwise, it's just healing. The Bard got healing, the Cleric got healing. Why do these classes need healing? Cleric, of course, that's your go-to, but it seems like they want to bake in a bit of healing into every class because we can make more diverse parties. You don't need a Cleric. Well, in my opinion, in 5e, you didn't need a Cleric already. So many classes, Ranger, Bard, Druid, Paladin, had access to healing magic, or anyone could pick up a feat to get access to healing magic. It wasn't really hard to have a healer in the team. So, and healing is pretty bad in combat anyway, so it's not like it's a huge issue if you go around without a healer. That's not really an issue we need to fix, and the way they're doing it with healing blossoms, again, just told me that either they don't understand, or at least they don't understand what I believe most people believe the Druid should be, a shamanic kind of character, or they don't have the imagination or the inspiration or the motivation to create something that feels fun and unique, because this isn't it. Another thing to touch on is also that they have fixed the proficiency issue, where a lot of the stuff we saw in the first playtest packages had first level or second level features that scaled on proficiency. The Cleric was a terrible example of that, where it just double scaled. So proficiency meant everything. You could take 1 or 2 levels of Cleric and you would just have insane healing at later levels. And they had a little sidebar in the document saying, well, we fixed that based on your feedback. And my question here is, why did you need our feedback? If you have a design team that are the stewards of the game, as they like to call themselves, they should know the game better than anyone else. It's pretty obvious, to me at least, and it seems like it's pretty obvious to most people, that giving out proficiency-based features at first level that are that powerful is a huge issue, because you have multi-classing in the game. That shouldn't come as a surprise. It shouldn't be something where after 4 months of deliberation and careful playtesting, we've discovered that proficiency scaling features at level 1 is not a good idea. Why did you need our feedback to determine that? And again, not trying to go after the design team specifically. I have no idea the conditions they're working under. I have no idea how they're working. I have no idea about their motivation, inspiration, anything of that. So it's just Wizards of the Coast as a whole that I'm blaming here. But to me, it just seems so nonsensical to ask us to playtest stuff that it just seems like they haven't either internally playtested or discussed that well. Because if you had done that, you would have realized in an hour of discussion that, okay, maybe we shouldn't base stuff on proficiency bonus if we're going to give it out at first level, because that would lead to more people dipping. Moving on to the Paladin, which was what I wanted to cover in a video, but I just felt too discouraged because what I'm seeing is just so all over the place. First off, if there was a martial or semi-martial character that needed nerfing, the Paladin was it. It has some, I wouldn't say huge issues, because it was still at heart a martial character, but it had some issues where it vastly outperformed other martial characters. And I actually believe that removing critical hits from Divine Smite is a good step to take. That was a good direction. I think it makes combat less swingy, and I know some people are not pleased with the change. They wanted to roll those 16 d8 smite dice when they delivered a crazy smite, and I can understand that. I have a player in my game playing a high-level paladin. He has a lot of fun rolling those dice when he crits, but it's also something that's very, very difficult to balance around when you're DM. You don't know if the paladin is going to crit two times on the turn, and that's 100 damage dealt, and suddenly your difficult encounter was not that difficult anymore. So there was an issue here, and I think that making so that you can't crit on smites is a good fix for it. What they also did was open up smites to unarmed strikes and ranged attacks. Unarmed strikes, not an issue at all, I think, but having ranged attack smiting, first of all, for me, in a sense of how that looks, doesn't make sense. You fire an arrow, and then when it hits, you say smite, and then it does radiant damage. Whereas when you hit something with a sword, you could sort of channel the energy through the blade as you strike them, and that sort of makes sense why you can smite after a hit. With range attacks, doesn't really make sense. That's more of a realism thing maybe, but the core balance issue of it is that not being able to do much at range was the Paladin's only weakness. The Paladin is such a strong class because it's quite versatile, and it's immensely strong in melee combat. It has heavy armor, it has shields, it has smites, and it also has spells, but there was almost never any really good ranged options for the Paladin. So that was the trade-off we're making here. We're going to be good at a lot of stuff, but we're going to not be great at range. Taking that away, you have now created a class that has no weak points at all. You can have your javelins and your greatsword, and you can stand at the backline next to the wizard and the sorcerer with your aura going, giving everyone plus bonuses, and then fire at range, or you can go up and be at melee. You're going to have the same AC, everything's going to be the same. You're going to be equally strong at range, at melee. It's such a huge buff to the Paladin, and while there's something I can see being more fun in the terms of you can play a different kind of Paladin now, it's also something where the Paladin really didn't need this buff. And maybe it's okay if a character has or class has a weakness. I'm not saying that allowing the Paladin to smite at range necessarily is the end of the world here. I'm just saying that maybe there should be some sort of trade-off. Maybe you have to declare your smites beforehand when you do it at range, because that's more realistic, and it also makes it so that you don't really want to be at range. But if you do need to throw your hand axe at the monster boss because you can't get in range, you're going to have to make that gamble that you're going to hit, because if you don't hit, you've wasted your smite. That could, for example, be a trade-off where you're not going to see a fully plated, shield-wearing, javelin-throwing smiter that is just always staying at range. But you're maybe going to see Paladins spec for a martial or a melee and somewhat range build. And that would be okay. But yeah, that's my issue. And I think that not seeing that this is an issue, that really making all characters be able to do all things at the same time is an issue, is another reason why I'm kind of concerned for where One D&D is going. Another thing about the Paladin that annoys me is this Find Steed feature they have at 5th level, where they get the Find Steed spell, and now they can find Steed, where we're sort of saying, well, every Paladin should ride a horse. In all the time I've played 5e, only in one game has a Paladin player actually cared about Find Steed and using a horse. Most of the time, that's not necessarily the fantasy that a player is going for, and getting a feature that sort of says, now you gotta go for this because you got it for free, you might as well use it, that shoehorns people into playing the character in a certain way with a certain flavor, and I just don't think it's necessary. You can make a subclass based around the Find Steed familiar thingy, where you have like, yeah, you and your horse, it's a cavalier or a knight, oath of the equine or whatever it's called, something like that. But baking it into the core class is just, to me, it's silly. It's a very silly decision. And again, it shows like, what is the direction we're taking the game? Why is this the feature that how is this an improvement to the Paladin? Why is this what we're focused on? Giving them Find Steed, just like giving Healing Blossoms to the Druid. It's like, did they really need that? Did that make the Druid more fun? Did that make the Paladin more fun? I think it shows a lack of direction. I think it shows a lack of vision. And I think it shows a lack of understanding of what makes the game more fun. Again, could just be me. If you think differently, please let me know down below. I could be wrong. Finally, there's also the overall state of the playtest document, where we get a document where there's just so much vagueness. There's so many rules that are poorly communicated. There's so many balance issues that should be really noticeable, where, for example, they define that Druid, when they wild shape, they lose all their features, but they don't define what a feature is. Is that just everything? Do you have their saving throws or skill proficiencies? They're gone as well. We don't really know. We can assume so, because features seems to be everything except what's in that stat block and what's specifically omitted, but it's not really clear, so there's just vague wording. And this is supposed to be an addition of the game that should make the game more simple, more easy to understand, clarify some of these issues that we're having. But every playtest document we're getting something that is just obscure and should be noticed. It's hard to believe that they have a thorough internal process where someone reads through these documents and sort of underlines whatever is unclear, because it just doesn't seem like it, with so many things are getting through where the wording is ambiguous or there's a clear balance issue. The same goes for the Paladin aura total cover. It doesn't go around corners like virtually any other aura you have. I can understand that they don't want a Paladin to be in one room and then the wizard in the other room is going to get the aura. That creates some issue. Couldn't it just go around corners or anything? Because now, as written, if you're behind a tree, nobody's going to get that aura, because that's full cover. If you're ducking behind a wall, you're not going to have that aura. And it's just annoying to play around with in combat, because you're going to have that combat scenario and you're going to say, oh, you don't have a line of sight to the Paladin here, so you're actually not getting the aura, even though you're 5 feet from him and you can hear him and everything. And maybe that's the intention, but then they should spell that out. And then you have stuff like it now working while you're unconscious, so it works on yourself. and you can add it to your death saving throws when you roll those. We also see it in terms of the smites, where the divine smite seems to be specifically worded to not double damage on a crit. That's my reading of it, and I think it's fairly clear that that's the way it's supposed to be read. They could make it more clear, but then we have the actual smite spells, which say the word extra damage, which would indicate that they are double. So they are supposed to work in a different way than normal smites, or is this just a wording issue? Because I think it is a wording issue. I don't think they want the smites to crit. Fix it. God damn it. You're doing something on purpose. You're intentionally removing the crits from the smites. Go into the spells and do the same. Make sure that you have your wording in order. It's not a huge document. It's like 25 pages. I don't know. It just feels not quite finished. It doesn't feel internally reviewed or play tested. And my overall concern here is that there's not enough effort or care or motivation, inspiration being put into creating a better version of Dungeons & Dragons. And I think it shines through. And again, not trying to critique the design team. I have no idea the conditions they're working under. I have no idea what's going on. I can only judge what I'm seeing here. And what I'm seeing here doesn't give me a lot of optimism when it comes to what's going on with One D&D. Because it feels sloppy. It feels more first draft like, and it feels like we're going to waste some time reviewing and playtesting stuff that they just haven't put enough care into yet. You have stuff like them coming in and doing some epic boons, which I think is a nice addition. I think they actually corrected some stuff here where they're going to say, okay, we're going to make the capstone, the level 20 feature, even better. We're going to give it a stat increase that goes beyond 20, and we're going to give you an epic boon, and we're going to show 3 epic boons that are pretty nice. They are more fun, stuff like that. But why did we need to spend 4 months before we got these epic boons? The absurd laziness of the last epic boons we saw, where they just lifted it from the Dungeon Master's Guide, more or less, and they were so poorly balanced and so poorly evaluated, just again shows to me that it seems like we're either cutting a lot of corners here, we're not putting a lot of thought into it, or we don't have the necessary skills to actually design a better game. There's something going on, and I think it's going to mean that we're going to waste a lot of time. For me, going through and using 40 minutes, 30 minutes, evaluating this playtest document is going to feel sort of like a waste of time, because most of it's going to be, okay, yeah, you're taking some of the right steps. It just, balance is bad. Maybe do this, maybe do that. When they could have just actually spent those 2 months really crafting a good playtest document, making sure that they put care into it, making sure that they evaluated it, maybe even done some internal playtesting. And I'm hoping that they're doing all these things, but if they are doing, I don't understand why this is the playtest document we're getting. So yeah, I'm sorry if I'm being overly harsh and negative. It's not really what I want to do. I actually quite excited for One D&D. I was quite excited for it. I want Dungeons & Dragons to get that facelift. Personally, I probably would want them to just say, screw it, we're not going to bother with backwards compatibility. We're going to create something that is going to be really different, where we're going to fix some of the real core issues with Dungeons & Dragons. If they're not going to do that, fine, we're going to get a better 5e game as well. That's also better for our company financially, so that's fine as well. But what I'm seeing so far just has me really concerned that they can actually pull that off, or at least pull it off in the time frame they're looking at, because at this pace, 2 months between playtests, a bucket of content that is maybe a quarter finished, that's going to be a long playtest, and it's going to be a long road. And I'm not sure it's going in the right direction. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you can join us on Patreon over at patreon.com/Eventyr. You can also just subscribe to the channel and follow along. We do a lot of videos on 5e Dungeons & Dragons content, and of course our own content as well. So yeah, that's basically it. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.